Okay, we're down to the last couple of weeks of excavations inside the Memorial Church from 1906, and we are investigating two churches that stood on the site, the earliest one being from 1617 until the 1640s, when it was replaced by the brick church. That earliest church is where the General Assembly meets in July of 1619, and it was replaced sometime in the 1640s by Jamestown's first brick church. And for years you could look along the floor of the Memorial Church on the northern and southern sides and see both sets of foundations. The cobblestone footing for that timber frame structure for the General Assembly meeting, and then the brick foundation just to the outside, kind of enveloping around that wooden church. So the last couple of weeks we've started to notice things with how these two churches interact, and we now know that the brick church seems to have been partially built up around that timber frame structure and then finished at a later time period and the wooden structure removed as the brick church was finished. I am down in the trench that was dug by Mary Jeffrey Galt in 1897, where she found the cobblestone foundation for the timber frame, and that's located just to the east of where I am. The reason that that wall or footing does not continue here is that there's a grave from the brick church's period that is built up next to the foundation for the brick church and went right through where those cobblestones and clay would have sat. But one of the interesting things we've noticed about the foundation, because that cobblestone area is not here, is we've been able to see that the gray or white mortar that we've been seeing all the way down the southern wall in the east and on the north comes to this point and then is just slightly off from the rest of the foundation to the west. So you can see that the mortar here is kind of a grayish or a white color, and then right next to it with a clear division it turns to a buff color. And they don't seem to be keyed into one another yet, but we will be doing a test on the outside of the wall, providing there's no grave at the confluence of the two. Okay, so we think that this wall, the southern wall and the eastern wall and northern wall, were constructed first up around the timber frame, and that at a later time period, perhaps when the colonists were able to raise more funds to build the rest of the church, they added on this western end and met it up with the rest of the walls they'd already constructed. Okay, the most intriguing feature that we've had in the western wall is this archway here. And at first we thought that maybe this was structural, had something to do with this end, and maybe it had a match on the other side. But as we started to look at it, it's really, really poorly put together down under the ground. And the second idea we had was maybe it had to do with drainage, and we could tell that there was a lot of backfill thrown into the center of the archway. And when we got to this corner inside the church, there was a feature right up next to where the arch should be. And we figured, well, maybe this had to do with some kind of sump and drain leading away from the church while they were constructing the brick church around the timber frame. However, as we started working and investigating, we quickly found coffin nails at the level you see here, and now believe that there are at least two burials that were located in this spot, probably located with the timber frame structure, the 1617 church. And when they constructed this western wall and were digging their builder's trench, they must have disturbed those graves. And because they didn't want to disturb them much more than they had with the trenching, they put this arch up over to try to avoid disturbing the human remains. Okay, we're in the northeast corner looking at where the eastern wall meets up with the northern wall in the corner, and you can see that there's only approximately 10 or so courses of brick down to subsoil, and then this is the bottom of this foundation on the eastern wall. However, as it continues to the south, it starts to dip down, and the hole there, and then where we've just dug our test for our well-cellar combination, the brick courses dropped to 27 courses down. And the theory is that they were probably having trouble with the timber frame church's eastern end because it had sat over top of this backfilled feature from the early fort period, and it was sinking. So when they go to build the brick church's eastern wall in about the same area, they try to go down deeper to hit subsoil in order to make a more stable wall. Okay, so for scale, I'm about 5'5", and you can see that our 27 courses of brick come down to just a really, really thick clay layer in the cellar well. And so I think that the mason probably got to this level and figured good enough, and it wasn't one of these sand layers of fill that we've seen on both sides in our profile. Okay, so the arch in the western end of the church, the reason for this eastern end going down so deep being because there's an early Fort period feature underneath that it was trying to avoid settling into. And then the two phases of construction for the brick church were huge surprises. You never know at Jamestown what you're going to find when you stick a trowel in the ground.